How's it going, everyone? This is Pedantic Gamer, and today I'm looking at the Far Cry 3 multiplayer on PC. Now you'll see straight away here as I pull up the scoreboard that there's an actual ping level shown using bars. It's in the top right hand corner of the scoreboard in kind of an odd position. And that brings up the first big problem I have. Why is the ping level being shown on with bars? I mean, I know a lot of games do this on console, etc., but this is PC, and it's really not good enough. I want to know what my actual ping level is, not a bar representation of my actual ping. It also brings up a second point that is really almost a killing point for the multiplayer of this game, and that is it uses peer-to-peer and it uses matchmaking, so there's no server browser and there's no dedicated servers. On PC, I really think this isn't good enough, especially with a game where there's going to be a smaller player base anyway, because it makes it really hard to find a game that doesn't lag out constantly, which is essentially all I'm able to find at the moment. I find the occasional game where I'm put as host so I don't get lag, but then everyone else gets lag because it just doesn't do a very good job of matching people from the same territory with one another. Either that, or there aren't many people playing online, which is certainly a possibility. Maybe a lot of people are still playing the single player, which is entirely plausible given that the single player is excellent. I believe I'm about halfway through it at the moment. I may be incorrect about that. I've just moved on to the second island, the South Island from the North Island, but I have been doing all the actual side objectives and it's taken me about 25 hours to get to that point. So there is actually a huge single player campaign, and I have done a first impressions video on it. If you want to see that, just click the previous video, or I'll leave a link in the description as well to it. Now, so far I'd have to say, if you're going to pick up this game, at least on PC, the reason to do it is the single player, which is excellent. The multiplayer so far is good. There's no denying that it is actually good, and there is this weird reload bug where you sometimes have to reload your gun several times, which you would have just seen. But outside of that, it's good, but it's fairly generic. There's nothing about it that is all that special. It's the perfect example of almost a tacked-on multiplayer, which I hate to say because it does have a map editor, which I haven't actually spent much time with yet, and that could actually change my opinion on it. Because if there's a constant continuation of new maps constantly coming out from user-generated content, that could actually change how well this multiplayer actually fares. But as it is, with just the actual default maps that the developers created, there's nothing special about it. There's the standard weapon unlock system. As you level up, you get more unlocks for your guns and you unlock more guns. The only unique thing there is when you actually get a camo for your gun, it also changes how the gun behaves, so it can actually increase range or increase damage or decrease certain things, and that's actually linked to the actual camo, which is kind of an odd thing to do. I don't necessarily dislike it, I don't see why they've done it, but it doesn't hurt the game in any way, shape or form. But yes, the game is ultimately very generic. There's nothing that makes it stand out. It just has no personality. It has the kill streak system, which you've seen there. I pull in a UAV essentially. And one thing I do like about that, though, the kill streak system or the point streak system, I'm not entirely sure which one it's using, is the fact that they're not overpowered. They give you a nice little buff, and they generally give your team a nice little buff, but they don't completely change how the game actually plays. You don't suddenly dominate because you've got this huge air support, which is something I've always hated in games which use kill streaks, and I generally actually prefer them to not be in the game at all. But when they're just a passive buff, like it is in this game, or from what I've seen so far in this game, I actually don't mind them. They actually do add to the experience, and they actually reward you, generally for playing as a team, because it's very hard to lone soldier and do extremely well in this game. Now, the maps are something that I do like compared to most FPS of recent times, and that is that they're fairly large. Now, this of course isn't such a big positive on PC when you've got games like PlanetSide 2, which is free to play and has maps that well, the amount that they're bigger than the maps in this game is just ridiculous, and the player count compared to this game is also ridiculous. But especially if you're playing on console, these are some of the bigger maps outside of possibly Battlefield 3. Well, Battlefield 3 does have bigger maps, but outside of that, they're much bigger than Call of Duty and Medal of Honor Warfighter and most of its competitors this year. So that is one definite positive depending on what you actually like in your multiplayer experience. Personally, I do find the maps to be a little bit too big for the actual number of players that are on it, and a lot of the time you spend just walking around trying to find someone to actually kill, as you can see right now. Now that has negatives of course associated with it, but there are positives. For example, spawn camping is very minimal. I'm not constantly getting killed, and I'm actually able to enter a fight without being just immediately shot in the back, which of course is not fun, and is something that is present in the big shooter of this year, which is of course Black Ops 2, and it's actually kind of nice and refreshing to see that you're actually able to enter the war zones generally upon spawning without immediately being thrown into them. Now, I should mention that the actual weapons, much like the single player, don't have much personality. You point where you want where the enemy is, and then you aim and fire, unlike what I just did there where I completely failed. And you generally kill the enemy. There is actually no real kick to any of the guns, and it's actually kind of disappointing, and it actually hurts the multiplayer more than it does the single player. In the single player, it's a bit of an annoyance, but it doesn't really hurt the game in any way, shape or form. In the multiplayer, it really reduces the skill level required to actually do well in the game, because you don't actually have to compensate for how the gun actually works. Every gun essentially feels the same as another gun outside of if it's automatic or semi-automatic and whatnot. But if it's an automatic gun, it feels like any other automatic gun. If it's a semi-automatic gun, it feels like any other semi-automatic gun. And there is a bit of variation in the pistols, but outside of that, you won't really be using the pistols often, and the guns really don't feel that different to one another. Now, this may change as I unlock more things on the weapons. Once again, this is just first impressions, but at the moment I am very disappointed with how the guns actually feel. Now, you'll see right now that I'm going to cling on to life, and I'm actually tapping E constantly. Thankfully, I'm not doing this live, so you won't be hearing that to such a degree like you did in my first impressions for the single player. But that's actually a very unique system where anyone can revive anyone. Now, I believe you can't be revived if you're either killed by a headshot or if you're killed twice. So once you've been killed once, if you die immediately after being revived, then you won't be able to actually be revived again, which is actually kind of nice, because I've played games like Killzone 2 where you'd be revived, instantly killed, and the person would be hidden behind a corner with the other person standing around from that corner killing you, and then they would revive you again, so the person who's killing you isn't really caring because they're getting all these free kills, and you can't actually stop yourself from being revived, and it can be incredibly annoying. So it's kind of nice that you can't actually constantly just be revived in this. Although I would say I would actually like it if I could just hold down a button or just press a button once, and then it would actually do it, and I didn't have to just constantly click that button to stay alive, because that is actually incredibly annoying that you have to constantly click E over and over again if you don't want to actually respawn immediately and actually have a chance of being revived. It's a minor issue, you could say, but it is still an annoyance, and it's something that may work on console, but it doesn't work on PC. I hate constantly clicking the buttons over and over again just so I can, achieve something that could have just been one single button press. It isn't a minor annoyance though, and it isn't a deal breaker by any means. So ultimately I think I should talk about whether this multiplayer is worth getting the game for or not. And I'd have to say, unless the map editor proves to change how the game actually plays and there's a lot of user-generated content, which is entirely possible, I'd have to say no though. If that does happen and there is a lot of user-generated content, this could be a very, very good multiplayer game. Of course, it is very shackled by the fact that on PC, it uses peer-to-peer and matchmaking, which isn't such a problem on console where there's a lot more players. But ultimately, it's very hard to recommend now. If you're looking for just a multiplayer game, definitely don't pick up this game. You're much better off looking at games like Medal of Honor Warfighter, although that also has a very low player count now, and games like Black Ops 2, or personally the game I would be looking at if you're looking for just a multiplayer experience is still Battlefield 3 with the new expansion pack that was just released. It looks to be a fabulous expansion pack. I haven't had a chance to play it yet, but that's where I'd actually be spending my money unless you already have it. So there you have it. The reason to pick up Far Cry 3, at least from what I can tell, is the single player. I haven't yet had a chance to play the actual co-op area, but definitely so far the single player is the reason to pick up this game, not the multiplayer. Anyway, this is Pedantic Gamer. I do hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, please consider giving it a like and subscribe, as it does help me out, and I do hope to see you next time.
Probably wishes we just killed him.